Good evening, everyone. Our paper is a comprehensive taxonomy of IoMT attacks, vulnerabilities, and defenses. Next slide. So the purpose of this paper is to provide a comprehensive analysis of the Internet of Medical Things security, more specifically implantable medical devices, consisting of devices that assist individuals with mild to severe medical conditions such as pacemakers, ECGs, neurostimulators, etc. We aim to create a taxonomy in order to assess the overall security, the identification of pre-existing and potential attacks, feasible mitigative measures, schemes, and tools that may be available to combat any aforementioned attack strategies. Next slide. So this paper taxonomizes current prevalent and relevant attacks that are plaguing the world of IoMT and within IMD specifically. This taxonomy is done through the means of literature review, where a brief analysis of vulnerabilities, attack proliferation, operation, and mitigation can be provided with the overall goal of preventing future reoccurrences. In addition to the analysis of a multitude of devices, the respective brands and models are included in the taxonomy in order to increase comprehensiveness. Some questions that we are considered within our research are: what vulnerabilities exist in a device that allows attacks to occur? How are these attacks performed? Are there any methods, strategies for remediation? Now we have Carly with background and significance.
Our three main definitions in this paper are IoMT, which stands for the Internet of Medical Things, PMD, personal medical devices that can be implantable or non-implantable, and AVID, attacks, vulnerabilities, and defenses. Historically, the medical industry has lacked a security mindset when it comes to creating their devices, as they were designed without the possibility of firmware updates or hot fixes. In 2014, the FDA released guidance for the creation and management of cybersecurity in medical devices. Next. However, despite this guidance, there is still a disconnect between the medical and security industry, which has resulted in attacks and vulnerabilities on IoMT and HIPAA violations due to the sensitive patient data leak. The main issue is that these attacks on IoMT can lead to physical harm, since healthcare professionals and patients rely on accurate data to administer treatment. For example, IoT insulin pumps could have their communication channels compromised by hackers who can alter medication dosages and cover up concerning vitals. Now Aiden will discuss our research design.
Our research will investigate AVDs on the IAAA and CAA models of IoMT and PMDs. So as the timeline, or for the timeline, we create taxonomies based on literature to correlate each category effectively. And we perform a literature review of 152 peer-reviewed articles and research that research IoMT attacks and propose different defenses. And then we define and categorize the following for each reviewed article: IoMT device types and AVDs per IoMT device. Finally, we create threat models based on the defined categories. So our novel techniques, we noticed that previous literature focuses more on theoretical attacks, and we want our paper to be more comprehensive. It's going to be a taxonomy of IoMT vulnerabilities, practical attacks, proposed and implemented mitigations, and it's going to be useful on the defensive side of things for the blue team and the offensive side of things for internal red teams. Next slide. So when we analyze the relationship between device types and AVDs, we obtain the relevant categories from paper source summaries, we extract the device types and related categories, we list each device type and categories and AVDs in a table for analysis, as you can kind of see on the bottom there. Next slide. So the second part is that we have to identify and define broad categories for each different type, and those types are going to be non-unique categories, and those must have at least 10 individual papers reference them to warrant inclusion in our taxonomy. And then we have unique categories that were only noted due to like the benefits and merit when doing a full taxonomy. We don't want to leave stuff out just to leave it out. And by defining categories, we can easily conduct a broad industry analysis on these subjects. And next is going to be Wyatt.
So this taxonomy allows researchers to quickly identify specific device types and their AVIDs. So while other researchers have conducted taxonomies within the same spectrum of IoMT devices and PMDs, they tend to present on a specific area and limit their domain to a short margin of devices, vulnerabilities, and attacks rather than a comprehensive one like we do. We anticipate our audience for this taxonomy to be manufacturers, hospitals, doctors, insurance, and technology companies to use them for threat modeling. Now we've created three charts from our threat model data for helpful visualization. This is a chart of the attacks that we observed on IoMTs and PMDs with certain vulnerabilities, which we gathered from our taxonomy. So essentially, the specific kinds of devices and vulnerabilities are on the x-axis, and the number of attacks we observed on each of them are on the y-axis. As you can see, the most common vulnerabilities are authentication flaws, where devices don't authenticate communications, cryptography flaws, where information isn't encrypted, and data validation flaws, where data integrity isn't confirmed. Two metrics we can draw from this data. First is suggested defenses for IoMTs and PMDs per attacks. So the defenses the authors of our papers chose to focus on were generally aligned with the most common attacks we experienced. Most authors were concerned about using, say, IPS to prevent spoofing attacks caused by authentication flaws, and data encryption, and using data encryption to prevent data exposure attacks caused by cryptography flaws. The other metric is suggested defenses for IoMTs or PMDs per vulnerability, which is largely aligned with the previous chart. Here, authors are concerned about using IPS to prevent authentication flaws that allow spoofing attacks, and using data encryption to prevent cryptography flaws that allow data exposure, and using integrity checks for validation flaws that cause data corruption attacks. The reason we included per vulnerability analysis rather than just per attack is because an attack requires a vulnerability, and if attack is theoretical or unknown, you would have to use the vulnerability metrics as the attack doesn't exist yet. Otherwise, the attack metrics would generally be just fine. Next, we have Nick with the conclusion.
IoMTs and PMDs are the last line of defense between a patient's life or death, so they require even stricter security. Our work wants to provide a better and detailed explanation of the threats targeting these devices to better fight against them, since you can't fight what you don't understand. First, we present the vulnerabilities entirely in the targeted devices. These can be cardiac implants, defibrillators, and others. For the attacks to occur, there needs to be a motive. An example can be ransomware, where you have to pay the hacker. We then describe step by step what the attacker does from step 1 to the successful breach. We give a detailed and tailored by specialists to counter and repel these malicious attempts. Next slide. This is the source that we used, and we are now ready for questions that you guys may have.
So I guess I can speak to this question from Chris a bit. She asks, did you come across any information that surprised you? And if I can go back a few slides, I want to say yes, because the combination of our, basically the attacks that or the defenses we observed per attacks, the most common ones were data encryption, integrity checks, as well as rate limiting and signal modification. Yet the most common vulnerabilities that authors were concerned about protecting against was authentication flaws, cryptography flaws, data validation, and then human error, which doesn't exactly match with the fourth category I specified previously. So it's interesting to see the researchers be primarily interested in technical solutions to various attacks, but then trying to apply those to attacks caused by human error, in which case usually a policy or some sort of change in the process of the way that an organization does business would actually resolve that concern more effectively. Does that answer your question? I guess so. Cool.
I can answer this one. So HIPAA does come into play when it comes to this. We basically just focused on how these attacks can affect someone's medical device physically and health-wise, but there have been issues with data leak when it comes to the patients, data being leaked out, and that goes against HIPAA, and that results in some serious violations when it comes to the device manufacturer and the hospital too.
All right, I guess that brings us to time. Thanks